Good morning and a very warm welcome to the DGAP morning briefings. My name is Guntram Wolff and I'm the Director of the German Council on Foreign Relations. And today I'm really pleased to discuss with you the geopolitics of China's smart cities. Now, I guess the first thing we will have to learn today is what are actually smart cities. And then we have to understand what is the geopolitics of it. But this is really a very exciting new research field, and I'm really pleased to have with me today two researchers who are real experts in the matter. First, our very own Valentin Weber. Dr. Valentin Weber is a research fellow in the Geoeconomics and Technology Center of the German Council on Foreign Relations, and he is a cyber expert and with a PhD from the University of Oxford. And Pia Hüsch is today joining us from the UK. She is a research fellow at the RUSI Institute, the Royal United Services Institute, where she works in the unit for cyber technology and national security. And we are still hoping that our third speaker, Greg Walton, will join us later, but so far he hasn't joined us. Perhaps there's a technical problem so far. Now, the topic is really important in the sense that China develops integrated information systems to guide traffic, guide everything that matters for the management of cities, and is exporting this model, which is very data-driven, artificial intelligence-driven, not only within its own country, but it's exporting it also to third countries where it gets increasingly, it is increasingly being used and being applied. And by doing so, China gets access to significant amount of data, information, and that might even have an impact on the future of warfare. And in that sense, it is a highly relevant topic. And I'm really pleased to hear today about this and then, of course, engage with you in the discussion. As usual, this is recorded and we want to make it as interactive as possible, meaning we spent the first 25 minutes or 30 minutes here in the panel, really interacting with each other. And then we open it up to you for your questions, remarks, and comments. And so I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. Valentin, without much further ado, explain to us what are smart cities and why they matter.
Thank you so much, Guntram, and good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be here and also to discuss this very important topic. Smart cities are basically a city filled with sensors, sensors that gather data, whether it's on traffic, whether it's on the health of the citizens, or of crime rates. If you know that there's a crime happening, each Saturday at 8 p.m. somewhere in a part of a city, then that would feed into the data of the smart city. And then the system would give you predictions and say, okay, in February in this area, there's usually a lot of crime. That's why you need to send more police there. Or you would have some early indication of people gathering in a very spontaneous protest. And so you would want to deploy also law enforcement there. And that really matters because what China is doing very different from what is happening in the West. What China is doing, it's really it's proposing a turnkey solution. It's giving you a whole package for the entire city, from curbing crime to tackling health problems, or to all kinds of issues, from increasing the efficiency of the energy grid. And that matters because domestically in China, that means that the Communist Party will likely stay in control, because that data-driven system of governance is really, really efficient, and the citizens in Chinese cities, they take advantage of a very seamless experience, easy payment, easy finding of parking spots. At the same time, it really comes there's no freedom, if there are protests, they are very quickly curbed and also contained. So on the one hand, it's really important because likely it's a model for governance, of authoritarian governance, and that really matters also for democracies because they're really lagging behind there. And as Guntram mentioned earlier, that those smart cities are being exported. So in a lot of African countries, for instance, curbing crime is really, really, a priority. And so China says, okay, we can give you a lot of cameras, we can give you a lot of, data-driven policing systems, and that will help you to curb your crime, but also to keep you in power. And so that's second thing. It's also very, very attractive for abroad. And I think what's most the key issue is that this is really a revolutionary technology. If you make smart cities well, then it's revolutionary. And in China, that's seen as the third internet revolution. The first internet revolution you had in the 60s with the internet protocols, you had the first emails being sent out, and that would propel the economy. Then in the 90s, you had the World Wide Web, the browsers, right? That's what we're using now for having this call. The World Wide Web came, and now this third internet revolution is about data integration in cities. And that's really going to be a key economic advantage because the first revolutions were driven from the US, and now the third one is coming from China. So that's really important to see because it's going to be a huge economic advantage, a huge also gaining reputation for China because its data model of governance works.
So Valentin, I mean, just to understand better and perhaps to walk us through this again a little bit more in detail. So basically, what you're saying is that China puts up these sensors everywhere in cities. I mean, we know that there's more cameras, I think, in China than citizens, or almost as many cameras, public cameras, than citizens. They have sensors for water systems, sewage systems, electricity systems, data systems. So everything is basically being recorded. And the new thing here is the fact that this data is being used and exploited by an artificial intelligence, so basically by smart algorithms, smart computers, and used then by the Chinese Communist Party to ensure, I mean, you can say an orderly, well-functioning city, which has many positive sides, I guess. So you can find a parking spot very easily. You don't get into traffic jams because those traffic jams are already prevented by the artificial intelligence mechanism. But of course, it can also be used to suppress anything that is unpleasant for the Chinese Communist Party. So I think this is really a fascinating development. And now you're telling us, well, that is being exported to third countries. So can you just explain what that means, being exported? I mean, so China goes to third countries and says, look, I mean, do you want to buy these systems? Just explain to us what it means and how China then would be able to access that kind of data in these third countries.
Sure. First of all, to give you an idea of the magnitude of the exports. So there's hundreds of Huawei and ZTE smart cities around the world, across on every continent. Even in Germany, there were recently 2 in Duisburg and Gelsenkirchen, but they were kind of put on hold now, just like because the sentiment in Germany has also changed. We see that smart cities are being considered similarly as the 5G issue, right? So it's becoming more restrictive here as well in France, the UK. So what we see is really that Chinese companies just seek export markets, right? They want to increase their profit, and that's why they go abroad and try to sell everywhere where they can. And that's being helped with local embassies on the ground. So you would have a Chinese embassy, let's say in Uganda, which would help seal the deal, right? You would have the economic department of the embassy. And so you'd have that system built. You'd have the CCTV cameras shipped, but at the same time, you'll have, let's say, Huawei employees going on the ground and training local police officials, and sometimes helping them even, to access, to help them find, dissidents or other political opposition parties that they want to track. So you really have also training on the ground of the people, because imagine you have a police somewhere in, let's say in France, and they don't know how to handle the system. Then you'd have some sort of training. And how do you access the system? I think a lot of it is being done because most of the importing countries, I think even, let's say Indonesia, imports the system. They wouldn't know what the smart city does. It's so complex. It's driven by AI. We know that AI systems are like a black box. You'd have it would make a decision. It would give you an option. You wouldn't know what's happening. And we have found, we've seen also already that often the data is being backed up in China. So it's stored in China. And so they would have already automatically access to those systems, because people wouldn't know where the data is, and so it's a huge advantage also for them to be able to analyze that data.
Yeah. So I do want to come back to you, Valentin, in a few minutes to explore with you what it means for warfare in the future, because we haven't come to that point yet. But before doing that, I do want to give the floor to Pia, who has also worked on these issues, and just get your insights, Pia, on Chinese smart cities and what they all mean for the geopolitics of the day.
Thank you so much, and good morning from the UK. Well, when I think about smart cities and geopolitical implication, I sort of think about two topics really. And on the one hand, you have smart technologies rapidly developing, expanding across the globe, with the US and China as the main developers of these technologies. And I think it's important to stress that these technologies can offer fantastic opportunities for us, economic growth, increasing quality of life. The Germans in the room will appreciate the efficiency, but also things like combating climate change. And to see these technologies, I think we really need a factual assessment of their opportunities, but also the risks, cyber risks, data protection, other vulnerabilities. So I think we need to assess what these technologies are. And I think when doing that, we also need to assess our own capabilities. The US is still leading in the semiconductor front, but China has done a remarkable job expanding these technologies. And I think especially in the 5G discussion, we've seen how few European providers there actually are that can compete. And I think that makes us think hard on what we can do, what we must do better, and then also where we as Europeans are clearly dependent on global supply chains. That's sort of the first technology part. And then I think what's important is sort of the broader narrative and the context that these technologies are deployed in. And I think for me, really two narratives have developed. On the one hand, you have the US approach of smart cities, the idea to use technology to make customers or citizens' life better, quality of life, fewer resources, more efficiency, with a very much a bottom-up approach. And we have competition amongst technology providers. And yeah, the idea really is about efficiency in the smart city. And then China's narrative, although we've been using the word smart city, I think is really very much about the safe city. And the focus is on surveillance and control, prevention of crime. In COVID, we've seen the prevention of spreading a disease. And that comes with significant human rights implications and privacy rights violations in every way. But that narrative is attractive and it's powerful, and it can gather support from third countries who want to achieve similar things, who see China as a success story in many respects. It has a booming economy, but it also is attractive for those leaders who are very much interested in regime stabilization. And those are sort of the main two narratives that I see developing. We have other players in the field, like the EU, but I think, not quite as developed on the narrative front, more focused on sustainability and green technologies. but it really is primarily a US versus China narrative. And I think for us, when we look at that narrative, we often perceive it as a threat more than an opportunity. And I think there's many good reasons why we perceive China and the technology and the export as a threat. But I also think we have to be honest when we assess these things, why we see them as a threat. Is it for economic reasons? Is it because we're scared of cybersecurity implications? Is it because of human rights violations? Or are we perceiving them as a threat because we're buying into the American narrative and we want to retain our allies in the international order?
Thank you so much, Pia. I mean, just to follow up on this, I mean, I think you laid out very clearly these sort of different advantages and disadvantages, or opportunities and threats and human rights violations sort of being on the one hand, while sort of the safety and the stability of the system being on the other hand. So can you just walk us a bit through the implications of this in third countries? I mean, so China goes to Malaysia or Singapore or I don't know, Uganda, and basically offers that kind of tailor-made solution, and it really is attractive in many respects because it offers something that is actually nicely manageable and makes these cities work better. So how do they sell it, and what's the competition they have also for these kind of solutions from others?
Yes, I think you're right. It seems a very attractive choice in many cases, partially because it's also somewhat affordable. I mean, we've seen the same discussions for 5G in Germany and other Western countries. There aren't that many other technology providers who can provide the same services on that scale with that speed. I mean, China has mastered supply chains. So I think, first of all, there's relatively little competition, particularly to that price. And I think why that is sort of attractive is also in many cases because it comes with knowledge transfer and capability building, and really more than just the pure technology, but also, as Valentin has explained, support on the ground on how to use these technologies and how to foster knowledge exchange. And this is in many areas where we see rapid urbanization, where we see the need to perhaps adapt structures in cities. And I think that's why technology on that scale is really very attractive choice to many. And I think what is attractive for China here is that these technologies allow you to influence. To me, geopolitics in the 21st century is, yes, partially still about territory, but also very much about influencing people and influencing behavior. And I think daily technology that we use in our daily lives through cities, I think is very much a way in which you can very effectively change and influence social behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm looking now at Valentin to give us a sense on of the effects of that kind of technology on the future of warfare. So you just published a piece through our website, which is accessible also through our website, in which you argue that this actually has an effect or can have an effect on the future of warfare because of privileged access to information. So can you just enlarge on that?
Sure, thank you. It is very much a help in warfare. It's in a report that I recently wrote. I lay out that I look at the future of warfare, and we know today that the future of warfare will very likely happen in the urban space in cities. We see that already in Ukraine, where there's the battle for different cities, and most of the people, that's where most of the people live, right? And that's where all the power is held. And so if we think about smart cities, then becomes central in future warfare, because what they do is you have everything laid out. You know where the in a smart city you've planned. You know where the important points are. You know where the important buildings are. You know where important government officials are, because you can track convoys of cars, right? When politicians drive through the city, you'll have that convoy tracked because you want to protect it. And so if you're, let's say, China, and one potential scenario would be in a dispute over the South China Sea, right? There you have China in dispute with a lot of countries about islands, about territory. And if that were to escalate, and if China was going to invade one of those countries, it would already have all the cartography, all the data about the city, all the data about military vehicles, it could access that because Chinese company already provide, they gather that data, or they provide those services in the city. So you imagine you have a fighter jet flying into that territory, they could just integrate the map from the city and everything that's in there into their fighting material, into their war map. And we already see now that thinking emerging, that there's a merging between the governance system in smart cities and the decision-making capabilities that AI gives you there, to integrate that into AI battlefield, AI military systems. Because military systems function similarly, right? You get data from everywhere, right? From sensors, from maps, from open source intelligence, and you try to make sense of it for your war-fighting force, for your military, for the army. You want to know where to attack, and if you have all the data already provided, that would be a huge benefit if China were to engage in a future conflict with a country where it provides a smart city.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for laying that out. And of course, the war in Ukraine is interesting also in the sense that Russia clearly does not use that kind of technology and data, while of course Ukraine is using a lot of open source high-tech information, and arguably that has given Ukraine a significant advantage over Russian forces. I mean, the fact that they access open source data from their own citizens about location of tanks, etc., is a fascinating alternative approach, perhaps to sort of a smart city where you have a relatively centralized system that collects the data. So let me bring in Pia. I mean, just Pia, to perhaps you want to react to this warfare aspect a bit, or to any other of the big points that we've discussed. And then I will bring in our distinguished audience. Please already shoot your questions either in the chat or raise your hands. And, I'm very happy to bring you here into the chat so that we have an open discussion. It's always more interesting for our speakers also if you want to ask your question, not just in the chat, but live. Pia, please.
Yes, thank you. I think on the Ukraine example and the comparison, I mean, first of all, we see Russia is a hostile state in cyberspace and is conducting offensive cyber operations without having previously supplied us with any 5G technologies or so on. So I think that just as a side note. And so I think some of the cybersecurity concerns with China are certainly justified in some ways, but at the same time, we see there's other hostile states without that technology capability in the first place. And then I think Ukraine also very much illustrates how important civilian resistance is and how strong the Ukrainian civil society is holding up against the Russian aggression. And I think part of that is because they can communicate through smart technologies and so on, but also because they're relatively resilient to any information operations and influence operations. And I think smart cities just really expand the threat surface when it comes to influence and sort of using technology to influence that social behavior, social cohesion, interrupting social resistance. So I think that is one way in which I see smart cities potentially changing urban warfare, because it's also very much about that influence piece about, information operations and how vulnerable a civilian society is to that.
Wonderful. So let's bring in our audience. So we have already one question in the chat by Johannes Ahlefeld. He's asking, well, isn't it possible to offer an alternative package for democratic governance like Barcelona under the influence of Francesca Bria? And what are the potential obstacles that need to be overcome? I don't know who wants to take this. I mean, I think this competition, systemic competition, and what the West can offer as alternatives to cities that urgently need solutions for their day-to-day problems, I think is a very interesting one. Pia, do you want to direct?
Sure. So I'm not an expert in Barcelona, so I'm afraid I can't comment too much on that specifically. But I think there are alternative packages for democratic governance. That is true. I think we have to ask ourselves sort of at what cost. Firstly, developing our own technology is expensive. So the US has some of these smart technologies. I think in Europe we have some, but not to the same extent and at a higher cost. So I think we have to prepare ourselves to just pay more if we want these technologies. And I think that is an honest conversation that we have to have. We've had Russian gas, we had Chinese exports, and US security guarantees. In some ways, you really need to be honest. What do you want to pay if you want smart technologies with European, for example, privacy rights guarantees? And that brings me to the second point. I think a good way to ensure an alternative Western democratic governance I think is through regulation of, for example, privacy rights, data protection, but also an increasing amount of cybersecurity regulation that just adds additional safeguards while these new technologies are being developed, and that can apply to new technologies, existing technologies. But we really see a shift in that regulation where we put a stronger emphasis on binding obligations for those technology providers. So I think that is also key in order to ensure that democratic governance.
Valentin, you want to react?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add something to it and completely agree with Pia. I think the problem is also that European companies are really, and also US companies, they provide a small isolated part of a smart city. They would say, hey, if you want smart water management, here's our solution. If you want 5G connectivity, then that's going to be Nokia. If you want, let's say, some kind of smart industry, you would go to Siemens, right? And what's happening in China is that they would provide a whole turnkey solution, one package, and you wouldn't have to have all these different providers. They would have the system integrator. And I think that's what we would need also in Europe here, to have one company that can provide those different parts to different cities, and that makes it much easier for them. At the moment, I would say Western companies are not competitive precisely because of that reason, right? They might have all the privacy, they might have all the data protection, they might have all those democratic kind of features, but they can't provide a competitive solution. We know already in Berlin, we have Siemensstadt, which is kind of where Siemens is trying to put forward its smart solutions, but that's only in the trial phase, right? And whereas China has already, or Chinese companies have already exported it to 30, 40, 50 countries. And so we see really how we're lagging behind, and how I also don't see such an urgency within the European leaders. The US already is pushing stronger, right? They have trade fairs where they promote their companies, IBM, Cisco. That's where they push, but Europe is really kind of not yet. They haven't woken up, unfortunately.
Okay, let's bring in Peter Linke. Herr Linke.
Thank you very much for these very interesting inputs. This all leaves me with one question. What does all that mean? Well, in terms of peace and a war, where does this leave us with our understanding of critical infrastructure? does it make any sense, given these kind of technological changes, to sort out certain areas which can be named critical infrastructures, and others just are not part of that? And what does what kind of consequences legal consequences do run from these kind of developments? So the question is about our understanding of critical infrastructure given these technological changes. Does it make any sense to go on just reiterating things like critical infrastructure or not?
Wonderful, thank you. That's a very important question. So Valentin, you want to start?
Sure, I'll give it a stab. Let's see if I can answer. But this is a fantastic question, because it really I think catches well what's happening. What we see is a widening definition of critical infrastructure, because everything becomes connected. Everything is, let's say, if you look at thermostats, we have smart thermostats already deployed in many households, and they also interact with the broader energy system. And we have already seen, I think, in America, where that can also lead to a short disruption of the energy system if those smart thermostats don't interact properly. So it definitely questions the narrow definition that we have currently, right? We have dams, we have water systems, we have the energy grid, we have the telecommunication system, but now when everything becomes connected and interacts, right? And when data is being put in from millions or billions of sensors, and that changes our understanding. So if I got the understanding correctly, then yeah, we have to rethink our definition. And I think another point that I want to add is that today we're still talking about smart cities, but we are already seeing the development of smart oceans, of smart mountain ranges, of smart villages. Everything is becoming connected, and some people already have coined the term naked Earth, right? Everything is being recorded. And so even there, it's not tied anymore to cities, but to the world, right? It's increasingly becoming a smart Earth, because we have sensors on the seabed, we have sensors on the coastal ranges of cities to see which ships come in and so on. So we really have to broaden it even there and to extend, I think, our understanding of critical infrastructure.
Pia, let me bring you in, and I mean, just to push you also a bit more on this point. I mean, so I sort of get the point that critical infrastructure used to be quite narrowly defined, even though, I mean, it includes many crucial, it includes the crucial things: water, financial system, communication systems. So you have already quite a bit already in the traditional definition of critical infrastructure. So how does this concept of data and interconnected of data, how does that actually increase the scope of critical infrastructure? I mean, can you just enlarge a bit more on this issue of critical infrastructure, please?
Yes, so I think the initial definitions of critical national infrastructure, many countries we've seen already, they've already expanded their definitions and added additional sectors. I think coming from a cybersecurity background, I think it makes sense to have a list of priorities. You don't just ensure cybersecurity in all sectors at the same time. So I think having priorities is good. But at the same time, we've seen, for example, through ransomware attacks against education systems here in the UK, for example, education is not part of critical national infrastructure, but we've very much seen how, in the end, critical the effect is if schools have to close. So in some ways, that's very connected. And the discussions about supply chains, I think, also make that very clear. If you have a provider of a very niche technology or a service, and they are taken down, even if they might not be critical national infrastructure themselves, but they provide services or products to critical national infrastructure sectors, the effect is basically the same. So I think that's just where the interconnectivity of the supply chains make clear that it's not just about those defined 12 sectors, for example. And I think we see regulation, and you asked about the legal implications. we see regulation adjust to that. We see more binding, for example, cybersecurity regulation and obligations expanding beyond those critical national infrastructures to manage service providers, for example. The EU is expanding these obligations beyond these initial sectors just because they are already so interconnected.
So I don't see any more questions in the, now there is a question in the chat by Jannis Weber. So we'll take that one. And please, if you want to raise your hand and speak, yes, so Richard Scott also has raised his hand, wonderful. So we do those 2 or 3, and then we would conclude, even if we conclude a bit early, but we were also 1 speaker less today. So I think we can handle that. So let me just read Jannis Weber's question. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the possibility for China in using the collected data and potentially widen their influence around the world, either cooperatively or oppressively? I think that's a fascinating question. And I mean, perhaps it also is an invitation to develop a bit more the point on sort of the third internet revolution that you made, Valentin. I don't know if that's connected, but I think that would be also worthwhile explaining a bit more why this is sort of a big step beyond the World Wide Web and the internet protocol. And okay, let me also bring in Richard Scott, please. Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, so my question is related to basically what you mentioned earlier with how data is being backed up automatically in China. I think Valentin mentioned that. How is the EU looking at our data protection, about this regulation that is, with that is so strict, and how are we trying to compete with China, provided that many of this data that is used for smart cities would underlie very strict requirements, especially when it comes to personal data? How, again, would European companies be able to compete with Chinese companies that have free access to this type of information, that can evaluate it and improve their business operations to an extent that European countries can't? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Perhaps Pia, you want to start, and then Valentin, and then we conclude.
Yes, I think the question about how we can compete, I think is, I mean, I'm not a private sector expert, but I would say that I think part of that question is very much how much we want to pay for it. And I think we have to be willing to put a price on privacy rights. And it's difficult to compete in some ways, but I don't think it's impossible. We've seen the US, I mean, IBM, Cisco, those are very strong examples of companies that are very strong in the smart city sector. And I think, yeah, it just comes down to questions of how much we're willing to pay for certain, certain privacy guarantees. That's sort of my take. And I think on the question of, sort of influence around the world through these technologies, I think one thing that China is very much pursuing through these, through the export of these smart technologies, for example, in Indonesia, where initially there was actually quite a critical China and Chinese technology attitude, but through providing that training and the knowledge transfer that we talked about earlier, I think there's also a soft power influence that tries to get those middle ground countries on board with the Chinese agenda for cyber governance, and to gather support, for example, in UN fora where we discuss sort of regulation of cyberspace or governance thereof. So I think very much also a race for that middle ground country support in those international fora. I think that's one way in which influence can play out in that area.
Wonderful, thank you. And let me just add the question here in the chat by Christoph Waldersee, and let me just read it, and then Valentin, you have a go at all the questions. So smart city technology is already available, for instance, from the UK and for some years now. But of course, it was geared towards managing cities within the framework of governing rules and laws. It has therefore been foreseeable that governments like China would use it in a totalitarian way in exporting it. The question now should be whether the rules-based international order can meet this with our own systems and convince our country, other countries, to rely on it within a democratic system. In other words, we need to help these quasi-vulnerable countries to not engage in the Chinese system. So I think, again, a question of the competition, the attractiveness, and how to embed it in the international rules-based order. So Valentin, lots of questions still on your table, and please.
Sure. Oof, that's quite a challenge. I think with let's say to tackle the last one, with 5G, it was easier to tell countries not to engage because we would have Nokia, Ericsson, Samsung to provide an alternative and to jump in. That's a bit more difficult with smart cities because we don't have yet kind of these products. We have also seen it with submarine cables. I think that's also quite an interesting one. There also democratic countries would have alternatives to say, okay, let's not let China build this submarine cable because it will help in the espionage, but we will have other providers that are able to do that. So I think there were some countries like in the Philippines, I think there was a backlash against the Chinese smart city because of national security issues. And there the Senate really was, the Philippine Senate voted against it. And so I think it's really important also that we capture kind of, or we kind of engage also with the political party system in those countries that think about adopting these cities. Regarding Yanis, I think that the question was, how can China use that for influence abroad in a passive or cooperative way? And that's really, I think it helps them to, again, access data and to use it for their advantage. Today, we have very smart technology abroad that already can provide you the insights. If China is looking, for instance, for, let's say, a dissident in Thailand, they could more easily take that person hostage. We actually had a case where the Communist Party took a Chinese dissident hostage in Thailand, or a Chinese person of interest, and took it back to the mainland. And I think that would be much easier also with smart city technology. Then regarding Richard, I think for the EU, it will be hard to regulate smart cities and also data flowing outwards. We already see that with TikTok. That's a very kind of contained platform. And already there, it's really hard to say, where is the data flowing? And we keep on seeing reports that data still keeps going places where it shouldn't go. I think with smart cities, it's even going to be more different and more difficult because it's so spread throughout the city, data flows and so on. So it's going to be really, really hard. And again, as you said, that's a competitive advantage if that data is being analyzed and being used again for new algorithms. And one final point, I think also what Guntram mentioned is, why is this again a revolution? Why are these smart cities a revolution? What we see now is that it's not just AI systems being built in cities, but different cities connect each other's AI systems. And so that's really a crucial point, because those cities, not only within a country, but across countries, will start communicate with each other and also start interacting. And then if those systems are Chinese or Chinese built, then that will be the question. Those cities will interact on Chinese technologies, Chinese standards, and algorithms. And so that will really be a game changer, I think, because we will have that global interaction of these systems. And it's not quite artificial general intelligence, right? What a lot of people talk now with OpenAI and ChatGPT, but it's getting quite close. It's getting quite close where these systems are smart. They're acting sometimes autonomously, and also beyond our grasp, and with technology that was not developed by democratic countries.
So as we continue speaking, the discussion is sort of heating up, and so we get still a question by in the chat, which I do want to take. And I don't know if Peter Linke, you have a new hand or it's the old hand. But if you want to come in a second time, of course we can. So let me just get the question by Ferdinand Gehringer. Which is about sort of local data centers and that are an elementary component of smart cities. And he's sort of asking, how would you assess the approach that we rely more on regional decentralized structures with regard to smart cities and equip smart cities with regional computing and data centers in order to maintain data sovereignty? And that speaks, of course, to your last point, Valentin, where you say, well, actually these smart cities start talking to each other or interacting. So I mean, what perhaps you can react to that point, but Peter Linke also, please do come in with your comment as well, if it's a new comment, please. And then we really conclude, because
shall I now?
Please, yeah, Herr Linke.
Yeah, that's just so if smart cities are the future, and there are a lot of hints that they really are the future. So this means absolutely new forms of connectivity, data connectivity, also bringing together various data systems, as was just mentioned. So I'm not a technician, but this indicates to me that the future lies with space-based data transfer. So at the moment, I don't see Europe not that much prepared, or I don't see that this kind of question space assets in terms of these technological developments on Earth play any vital role in the European space policy. So what you have described means to European space assets, and how to protect them and how to develop them. I think without space-based data transfer, these new systems won't be able to be realized.
Okay, Valentin and Pia, please, your final reactions.
Space question I would like to leave to Valentin, if that's possible. But I do think that there's something very, very true in both of these questions. And I think that's our data debate actually has gone somewhat quiet. We've seen it massively after Edward Snowden revelations, and we had this great Gaia X program, for example. And I think overall we've gone relatively quiet on that front, on sort of data sovereignty. It has not been as dominant, I think, in the last few years as it used to be. Some of these projects, I think, have quieted down a little bit. We also see a new data deal between the EU and the US on data sovereignty. But I think, very much if we can decentralize structures, I think that is in many ways a good thing to maintain our data sovereignty. It would also make us less vulnerable, I think, in case, for example, of cyber operations, if there's a decentralized structure. But I think, again, it comes perhaps at a certain cost. We need to develop these capabilities in the first place. And I also think it might come at the cost of certain efficiency and sort of speed at which we can roll out some of these technologies. So I think an honest conversation about what our priorities are is key in that context.
Valentin?
Sure. Let me tackle the space question. And it is absolutely crucial on space, because all of today's technologies, whether it's smart cities or phones or everything, is based on also on GPS and geolocation. And so that's really crucial. If GPS is not available for one day, then the German economy would lose $1 billion or something, in revenue. So it's really, really crucial. And the European Union has started with some initiatives to become more autonomous in space. They have, the Galileo system. Now they started with the IRIS 2, which is a system of satellites that will be launched within these decades, and that's supposed to ensure secure communication also for European data traffic. So that's absolutely crucial, that Europe won't be reliable on private companies that are often not based in the European Union, like SpaceX or other companies. So there's really a push there, also resources being put behind it to go there and to become more autonomous there. So space is very, very crucial to answer that question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this really interesting and great discussion. And thank you for our audience for engaging. I know it's quite a techy topic, but tech is the future. And so I'm really glad that we had that conversation, because it will influence not only our own lives, but really also the global order. And in that sense, I think it's a super interesting topic. So thank you so much, Pia Hüsch, and thank you so much, Valentin Weber. And thank you to our audience for engaging with us. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.